Yeah, I'm Mark Anderson, roving editor for American Free Press, successor to covering Bilderberg for the late, great Jim Tucker.
I didn't get to see much of Jim. What was kind of the last thing he wanted you to do? Was there any sort of last favor or something that stood out?
More generally speaking, in the sense that a few days before he passed away, which was on April 26th of this year, he was encountering the fact that for the very first time he was physically unable to go to Bilderberg. He didn't want to deal with an international flight. Initially, he had heard that they were going to meet in Virginia again for 2 years in a row. But when he learned that it was going to be in England, he handed the baton to me, not because he thought he was going to pass away necessarily, but because he realized that for the first time in his career covering Bilderberg, he was unable to go. So in that sense, he said, I know you'll do good work. He gave me some tips and pointers and a framework to follow, very general. But he passed on his blessing and his confidence to me, and figured that I could do it well enough to honor what he had started. And so that's how it went.
Probably the United States still has the edge over Europe in terms of awareness and resistance. Why do you think is that, and what can we learn from the Americans?
I'm not so sure that's true. I think in terms of the general population, I think the European awareness and the media is more steadily aware of it. Just this meeting of Bilderberg 2013 here in Watford, England, the Telegraph has carried a story, the Times, the Guardian, the BBC, and two or three or four other mainstream media outlets. If you gauge awareness on the basis of mainstream media, Europe outshines America by a significant degree. Just a quick example, before I left, a little bit of Jim's advice, I called the Washington Post company, the parent of the Washington Post, and talked to Donald E. Graham's secretary. Donald Graham, of course, being the media mogul for the Post that's here just about every year. And the simple question, is he going to be here? They're still acting like they barely know what Bilderberg is, and they're still acting like they can simply deny or obfuscate the question when his name has been on the list year after year. So not only is the U.S. mainstream media still reluctant to do anything meaningful on this, they still barely admit they'll even be here when this meeting isn't even nearly as secretive as it used to be. So in America, unfortunately, I don't believe it is as good as Europe overall.
Specifically, I'm trying to understand the number of coups d'etats in Europe, the European Union, because the EU is their baby, it's their project.
That's correct.
In North America, they as well control to a large degree. So how do you manage to do coups d'etats without people realizing that it happened?
One way, and this is speculation, I never want to say something that's speculation and mislabel it, this is speculation, would be to create a false uprising and disguise it as an uprising when in fact it's an insurrection. They got rid of Gaddafi and they disguised it as an uprising, but it was an insurrection. There were brand new NATO guns on the scene. And then now you saw the Egyptian uprising, and you look at that and you go, well, which end of the telescope do I look down? Was this really genuinely and 100% a grassroots uprising, or did they do regime change under the guise of grassroots uprising? That is clearly one way they could and in fact do it, to create the false impression that the people want to get rid of the leader. The European Union was a slower coup d'etat, not so much of individual leaders, but of the structure of government. It started as the European Coal and Steel Community, and then the European Economic Community, and then the European Community, and all these alphabet soup names, and now finally the European Union. I'm competing a little bit with the hoopla and festival out here. At any rate,
the microphone will pick you up just fine.
At any rate, the evolutionary way that they've usurped the sovereignty of nations is the more quiet coup d'etat, apart from toppling leaders through false uprisings that they've done. And so now they want to go to a United States of Europe, which I predict with at least reasonable accuracy and confidence, is a topic this year in the UK, to get beyond just an EU, which is that slow coup d'etat of these individual nations' sovereignty, and then to cram it together even tighter under a United States of Europe. Because as the Brookings Institution heard at a May 3rd program in DC, that's how they want to save the euro, is by solidifying the Eurozone and the European Union. Switzerland, I would add, needs to make sure it stays out of the European Union, no matter what.
Now we have the ranking general of the Eurocorps force under NATO, but it's like this proto-EU army.
Really? Is he here today?
He's a French general, and his second in command is a German Bundeswehr.
I was aware of that unit, that entity, but the name. What's the name?
It escapes me right now, but
Is he here at Bilderberg 2013?
on the list.
Well, okay, the list to be reasonably trusted, maybe not 100%. The reason I ask is because the Brookings Institution heard that they wanted one army for all of Europe through Gianni Pittella, the European Parliament Vice President, told the Brookings Institution in DC, May 3rd, to reiterate, one European army for all of the EU, so NATO would only have one army represented for all of Europe, the United States of Europe to save the euro, and then the European North American Free Trade Agreement. These are the kind of broad moves that one would expect of Bilderberg, and if that individual you say is here, is in fact here, then that makes total sense, because he's the kind of guy that would help facilitate that, it would seem.
Now, Europe has always seemed like the big prize for the Soviet system, and also the forces controlling the United States. So, do you still see that fight over Europe? You know, do both sides still want it?
What are both sides? Which?
Well, on one hand, Russia and China and the BRICS states.
Oh, the BRICS states.
They seem to still want Europe. They say we need a joint European Union plus Russia Union. No more visa. People can walk freely without any sort of...
Whoa. You know, that's an extra dimension that I haven't thought about lately. I know they used to say that Warsaw Pact nations would simply be absorbed into NATO and the European Union, and then they would all become one happy family, as you say, with no visa and all that. That's one avenue that I haven't explored lately, but those forces, that has to be sorted out. Just what are the BRICS nations about? I know what nations they are. You know, I don't want to get the acronyms, but I think it's Russia, India, China, Brazil, and S is South Africa, if memory serves. So at any rate, what is that about in terms of who created the BRICS structure and what are they about? I think the important thing is to see what Bilderberg, if there's any relation between Bilderberg and the creation of BRICS, and therefore how those dynamics would play out. But it's either too soon to tell, or certainly I need to do more research on that. That's a big question.
Now we've seen especially Russian media branching out into Europe, branching out in the United States.
Russia Today,
RT, for example, or RIA Novosti, for example, kind of the old Soviet style publications and television stations. Now they are talking to an American audience, and they seem to cozy up to the people in the United States and Europe who are dissatisfied, and they offer this hand and they say, we can be your protector. And do you think that's kind of a dangerous game for especially Europeans and North Americans who say we might have a huge ally in Russia, a big protector, a big tough guy with an army and far-reaching powers?
Another big question. One of the things I always remember is the old saying, the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend. Vladimir Putin is an interesting and dynamic individual, but it's a question of whether to totally trust Putin. I wouldn't advise that the United States or the West or Western Europe should totally trust Putin. On the other hand, many claim that he's a kind of counterweight against some of Israel's abuses, for example, some of Israel's designs to perhaps attack Iran and get into the Syrian conflict, hence the concerns lately about the U.S. and Senator Menendez wanting to arm the Syrian insurrectionists. So I will just kind of give both sides of the story. We shouldn't necessarily trust Putin, and yet he seems to be a counterweight against some of the Zionist expansion, and he also a counterweight, apparently, against some of the U.S. Western imperialism. Putin, for example, denounces the drone strikes carried out by the Obama administration. Hopefully, Putin's doing that for honest reasons and not just doing it to make points. I think the jury's still out on that one, but people have to be objective and not fall for necessarily embracing the Russian bear just because he says the right things. You know, do your homework and take a good, hard, objective look, and don't jump to, quick conclusions.
Yes. Last question. We see that Bilderberg, the Bilderberg members, they're about 130 people, 140.
Yes.
Sometimes 120. Now, what do you think? What is your rough estimate? How many influential people have they recruited for this big project of global governance and sort of the end of the nation state?
How many? You mean over the years?
No, I mean today, a rough estimate. How many people did they recruit as active members of this scheme, this plan to bring about global governance and destroy the nation state?
Well, first of all, just the basics. I guess it's right around 140 that are here this year in England. I think what's as important is to say that they're really getting the technology guys, the geeks on board, the Googles, the LinkedIns, and obviously that has to do with the surveillance state that those techies help provide for them. And so I think that they're really getting into the sinew of this. You know, the number of people that they're galvanizing and harnessing to do this isn't so much as important as who and what they represent. And high technology are the relative newcomers to the old Bilderberg crowd, the old guard, the Kissingers, the Rockefellers, and so on. They're adding a new element to expand the surveillance state, even as they try and get rid of the nation state. They want to privatize the whole world, and in their model, in their way. I personally call Bilderberg the privatization of government. Government itself is taken out of the public sphere, and if anything should be in the public sphere, it's government. The very essence of government is public accountability. So as soon as you privatize that, it's almost like privatizing the money, which they did a long time ago, and that's their main engine of control. But you know, the number of people they've recruited over the years is obviously in the thousands, counting those that have passed away and moved on. But they go for quality, not quantity. And these techies are going to be the new kids on the block. And then the military people you spoke of earlier, and their one Euro army is of particular note. We really want to watch that one.
Now, Bilderberg, Eric Schmidt, the Google boss, he recently published the book with Jared Cohen, the regime change specialist from the U.S. State Department. And,
yes, I've heard of that.
And they did interview, for example, Julian Assange, who basically admitted in that interview of supporting the Arab Spring, him and his people. They said, we hacked Toyota in Cairo, we stole a satellite uplink, and we also kept one of the internet service providers up and rolling while the Mubarak regime was trying to shut everything down. So
does this not corroborate that uprising was possibly false? Go on.
Yes. And so Schmidt and Cohen, they both said that the military people, they don't understand the modern technology that people are using in their daily lives, and the nerds they have no understanding of how the military works.
Okay.
So, do you think this is kind of bridging that gap and just bringing the worst of both worlds together?
It certainly has all the odor, smell, and taste of that, yes. And what you spoke about where he collaborated with Cohen on the book, I am generally aware of. I read, I think, a short review of it or a statement on it. And isn't it interesting that people like Eric Schmidt, the head of Google, are so wrapped up in the idea of let's get rid of nation states. Hey, I'm a techie. I'm bored with technology. I'm tired of messing with computers. Let's sack the nation state just for something to do. I mean, this shows the megalomaniacal kind of subset in their minds that these pampered plutocrats have. It's incredible that kind of self-assured. That it's even their job to consider these things just because they have money. That's what's just so annoying and flooring about it.
Now, what would you say to these young IT professionals who are being suckered into this notion of, oh, we have the power, we can change governments, even though it's kind of the military financing it and overlooking it? What would you say to like this generation of 30-somethings and maybe 40-somethings and 20-somethings who do have that power, but only if they play along with that sort of Bilderberg guidance? It was said that the Google Zeitgeist conference was held here
just before this, right?
Yeah,
that is an excellent question. The general answer is that over-reliance on the internet and over-reliance on cyber activism will only go so far. That you still have to pound the pavement, and gladly many people here are, and they're using the technology in the best way they can for live stream internet and getting the word out. But yes, there is a definite underbelly to cyberspace, and Google is a big part of why there is a negative side to this, and Facebook too. And so that is just an excellent line of inquiry, an excellent question. I would say to people, do your research. Yes, use the internet, but also go visit your local representatives, go visit your local editors, make personal contacts. Don't drop the idea of personal contact, and raise your children with the knowledge they need, your grandchildren. Don't forget the old-fashioned ways and the old-fashioned values. Technology is not an answer to everything, because as you say, some of the system we use, is that which they built. We're driving down the highway that the Eric Schmidts of the world paved. So is the internet a snare? Note the name, internet. And then they call it the web. The web.
Web of intrigue.
Yeah, one gets caught in a web if one is not careful. So it also brought about the digital revolution, where much of our knowledge and our reference materials, it's all being put online, and now books are going out of vogue. So that means that everything we read can be stored in a central database somewhere, and then therefore the very body of knowledge we have can be limited or modified without our knowledge.
At a conference a couple of months ago, while they were promoting the upcoming book, Schmidt and Cohen said that in order to be relevant in the future, everybody is forced to use technology.
Forced.
Be it a fisherman somewhere in the world who is trying to sell his catch on the local market, or be it a terrorist group. They said everybody will be forced to use technology in order to stay relevant, but once you use technology, you make more mistakes.
Do they use the word forced?
Yes, that's what they...
That is very extremely notable. Yeah.
The meaning was there's nobody with a gun pointing at you saying, use Twitter, use Facebook, use these social...
Oh, okay. I don't want to misunderstand.
You can't make a living. You will not be able to make a living or have an audience or be able to connect and build something with other people unless you use technology.
Okay, so that's double talk. They're saying nobody's pointing a gun in your hand, but your head, but you still won't have a choice.
You would starve, basically.
Well, then they're saying that's double talk. They're saying you're not really forced, but yes, you are, which is typical builder talk, I guess you'd say. What's significant, Alex, about that is that this messianic, megalomaniacal undercurrent to what these people say, they think that they literally define the world. Therefore, you'll starve or fall in a pit if you don't walk the walk they want you to walk and talk the talk they want you to talk and use the tools they want you to use. In other words, as to say, you have no existence of any meaning outside our paradigm. And that would be a good summation to our talk today, that when you get this kind of people together under one roof, covering the areas of society that they cover along technological and military and media and financial lines, that means one big web to sew up outside of which none of us purportedly would survive. And that is the essence of Bilderberg: live in our system or perish.
They use the example of like one sought-after Al-Qaeda leader being killed because he made one private phone call on an unsecured line. He always took care, but that one thing got him. That's what
that may be a true story, and it may not. A lot of times those kind of stories are bandied about just to justify. So we're supposed to take their word for it that, okay, he made this one slip, okay, whatever. That doesn't mean the entire world should be enveloped in the way they want it to be. Just because they have money and privilege, they think that gives them special wisdom. It doesn't. At the end of the day, they're no different than anyone else.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck for the next few days.
Sure, thank you.